The House will be in order. Prayer will be offered today by our guest chaplain, Bishop Mar Awa Royale, Assyrian Church of the East, Salida, California.
In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Father of mercy and God of every consolation, we come to you at this hour asking you to bless our civil servants as they labor for our country and its citizens. Grant them your wisdom and enlighten them with your truth, that they might serve the greater good of our country. Strengthen them to be instruments of peace and justice in our society today. May they bring about reconciliation and hope in our communities and neighborhoods, and may they be exemplary citizens and servants to their constituents without distinction of race or creed. Father, we ask you to bless our land, which has been a beacon of hope and a refuge for the oppressed and the marginalized. Grant freedom to the captive, relief to the suffering, and help us all to construct a better and safer tomorrow for our future generations of Americans. Amen.
The story of Isaac Adams. To understand Isaac Adams, it is important to know what an Assyrian is, besides someone who loves dolma, rizla, kada bushala, and other good Assyrian food. How would you answer this question? There is a textbook answer, of course, descendants of the people who founded the Assyrian Empire with its great accomplishments. Or perhaps you would answer by describing the areas where Assyrians traditionally lived, or by our language, the language Christ spoke, or by comparing Assyrians to other ethnic groups without a country today. Actually, the answer is far simpler. Beyond culture, beyond language, beyond all this, an Assyrian is a Christian. For the Assyrians were the first people to accept Christianity, and Assyrians as a group have remained true to their Christian beliefs. It is this faith that has sustained the Assyrian people for centuries, but has also caused great suffering in the times when Isaac Adams lived in Persia, and in our times today, because of the fervent and never-ending antagonism towards Christians, especially Assyrians, in that region. Our story begins 100 years ago in Persia, presently known as Iran. It was a time when life was difficult, and Assyrian men often sought work in neighboring Russia and occasionally even in faraway places like America. It was a time when Assyrians, being Christians, were persecuted and often killed by the Muslims who surrounded their villages. Then, as now, often the choice was to flee to safety or to stay and suffer and even die. As a young man of 17, Isaac Adams journeyed almost 6,000 miles to America to study theology, so he could better minister to his people. While he could have maintained in America and enjoyed the new life he had made for himself here, Isaac Adams was determined to help his people, so he returned to Persia time and again. Dr. Adams was an unusual man. In a time when a college education was rare, he had earned both his divinity degree and his medical degree. In a time when travel was difficult, dangerous, and noteworthy, he had crossed the oceans 8 times in pursuit of his dreams. When all hope was gone, he took comfort in God's promise, and help miraculously was provided. What characterized his life? In books he wrote, 3 themes appeared again and again. Devotion to God. He loved Christ, whom his Assyrian people believed in and served his time of the apostles themselves. Love of his people. He had a never-ending concern for their spiritual and temporal welfare. faith to follow God's path. He trusted God in all times, especially in times of trial and trouble. Life was difficult for the Assyrians in Persia in the 1800s, as it is now for the Assyrians in many countries in the Middle East, for the same reason, their Christian faith. Because of this persecution, in 1903, Dr. Adams brought the first group of Assyrians to a new life in Canada, not as individuals, but as usually the cases, but as families. While California was the first choice because of its familiar and similar climate, sufficient land was not available at that time, an affordable price at the time, and thus the decision to settle in Canada, where land was readily available. In 1906, Dr. Adams returned to Persia and brought a second group of 40 Assyrians to North Battleford. They survived and prospered into the Assyrian community there today. Turlock is the other Assyrian community Isaac Adams was instrumental in founding. Beginning in 1910, Dr. Adams led some of the original Canadian settlers, along with the Assyrians from the Northeast and Midwest, to California for its most productive and agricultural conditions and warmer climate. They journeyed to a larger parcel of land he had located in Delhi, a town near Turlock. Arriving in 1911, several years later, Dr. Adams and most of the settlers purchased land in Turlock, where he had access to water for irrigating their vineyards and orchards, unlike the land in Delhi. Dr. Adams' life was that of a happy young boy until 1878, when he was 6 years old. Then his father and a companion who had traveled to Russia to trade were sent to Siberia without a cause, never to be heard of again because of an alleged passport violation. Shortly thereafter, an unscrupulous official in the town of Sengev took advantage of his father's absence and stole the family's home and vineyards, impoverishing his mother and her 5 children, all under the age of 12. He went to the U.S. for religious training, and upon his return home, he saw how the Persians reacted positively to physicians, decided to become a doctor so he could better serve his needy and persecuted people. After completing his studies at the missionary school and his medical studies at the medical school of the American Presbyterian Missionary Board at Urmia, also known as the Urmia College, he was elected as a candidate for the ordained ministry in the Assyrian Church of the East. Thus, he was ordained a deacon, priest, and an archdeacon by the late Catholicos Patriarch of the Assyrian Church of the East, Marul Shumun the 20th, who was the patriarch from 1860 to 1903 at the Patriarchal Cathedral of Marshalita in July of 1895. When the conditions for Assyrians became intolerable, he was determined to bring his fellow Assyrians to a new life in America, and thus founded the settlement in Canada and California. Here are some of the headlines of the remarkable life of Reverend Dr. Isaac Adams. Sent to live in an orphanage at the age of 6, tortured by overlord of the village when he was 13, and forced to leave his village and live in a neighboring village with an aunt for his safety. Entered the Presbyterian Missionary School at the age of 15. Taught in several mission schools at 16. Ordained as an archdeacon of the Assyrian Church of the East in 1895. Traveled to America, first across Russia, where he was imprisoned by Russian border guards, like his father, and about to be sent to Siberia when God intervened and he was suddenly released and allowed to travel to Germany, where he then sailed to New York City at the age of 17. Worked for the next 5 years to pay his education and bring his 3 brothers to America. Wrote a best-selling book, Persia by a Persian, and returned home to minister to his people using the money he earned from the book and lectures to support himself as an established school, and preached. Imprisoned by the Turkish authorities as an American spy, and tortured in an underground prison until freed because of the demands of the American government for his release. Sued the Turkish government for wrongful imprisonment and used the settlement funds he received years later to help bring the first group of Assyrians to Canada. Came back to the U.S. to study medicine, received his MD, and returned to Persia. Brought the first group of Assyrians to Canada in 1900. Returned home, married, brought his new beautiful wife and a second group of Assyrians to Canada in 1906. In 1910, he led a group of Assyrians from Canada to a new home in California, stopping in New York and Chicago, where other Assyrians joined the group. Isaac and Sarah raised 6 sons: John, Art, Edward, Albert, Clarence, and Henry, and 2 daughters, Clara and Florence, in Turlock. He enjoyed practicing medicine and farming until his death on June 2nd, 1942, at the age of 70.
My father was Dr. Isaac Adams. He brought a lot of Assyrians over here, got them started, worked and everything. I was born on October 13, 1924, here in Turlock. Amazing. Turlock was so small then.
I was born in Chicago, Illinois. That was November 16, 1921. So when he saw Turlock and met his 2 best friends that were from Chicago, when he came back, that's all he could say: "I have to move to Turlock. We're going to move to Turlock."
My name is R.B. Hubiar Jr. I was born in June 29, 1929, during the Great Depression. I was born in San Francisco, but in the old country, Dr. Adams was his best friend, and he wrote him a letter. He said, "This is God's paradise. You can grow grapes." So my grandfather came and he bought 40 acres in Delhi.
He had this relative here in Turlock. His name was Edgar, 1924. He kept saying, "Why don't you move to Turlock? This is just like the old country." And my dad wanted to come, and my mother said, "No, I don't want to go." So finally, they talked her into it. Her people were there. She didn't want to leave them.
My mother born in Baghdad, and my dad was in Iran. And yeah, they called it Persia at that time. My grandfather and Eve Babel's father came here together, looking for a place to put, to bring my folks and his folks over.
My married name is Louise Tamey. My maiden name was Louise Marshall. I was born in Chicago, March the 10th, 1927.
Shalom Aleichem. My name is Eleanor David Huskins, and I was born in Turlock, California in July 31, 1932. The Syrian community had to do with the church. Everything, there was no clubs, no nothing. It was Girl Scouts, but everything was done in the church. All activities, all social, everything was done at the church. So there was a lot of weekend activities, Wednesday night activities, Sunday. So our time was taken up. At that time, people that were farmers, we had food on our door. We raised chickens to eat. Everybody helped everybody. So it's not, it was a very tight-knit community.
Yeah, our dad was, he's B'nai Sidi, which is a village halfway up the mountain from Urmi, and was famous for its oina. When our dad came here to this country, I think in 1905, at the age of about 24, he and about 25 other young Assyrian fellows all came together. They went up through Russia, came over to England, and came into Ellis Island. They went upstate New York for that winter, but just about froze, so they ended up coming out to Chicago, which I don't think was too much warmer, but Dr. Stone took our dad in and really raised him and sent him to University of Dubuque, Presbyterian School in Dubuque, Iowa, Dubuque Seminary, and was just a great mentor to our father. Dr. Isaac Adams was our mother's uncle. Our grandfather, Joseph Adams, and Dr. Isaac Adams were brothers. And Dr. Isaac Adams came to this country and studied medicine and got his medical degree. He was also a Presbyterian minister. He, brilliant man, and he went back to Iran and tried to bring all of his family over here. Our grandparents were on the west side of 99 and Dr. Adams was on the other side of 99, and they literally grew up together. So that's the connection with Dr. Isaac Adams. So they were the very first Assyrians in Turlock. They came in 1910 to Delhi, 1911 to Turlock. Growing up, we were proud to be Assyrians. There were basically in Turlock, there were three ethnic groups. There were Portuguese, Assyrians, and Swedes. There were a lot of Swedes. But we were proud to be Assyrians, and especially proud of our mom and dad. Our mom being the first Assyrian in Turlock, and our dad being really the only educated Assyrian. He was probably about 15 years after he was here, he was given an honorary Doctor of Divinity degree from his seminary because he had done such an outstanding work among the Assyrians.
In atit valach cherma, with I work at Biet fallen on with Ativo Hayri Wallach. And should be Roshi Chazak, which is idoli, let Hannah for Biduk Bitar, the Bisparaniva. Holton State and why which is idoli. So, Udi Human the Bitaria.